Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was trained by the Amazons on Themyscira. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The wind that whipped across the rooftop was a cold, indifferent thing. It tugged at the lapels of Izuku Midoriya's black Gakurin, a phantom hand trying to pull him back from the railing he clung to. Below, the city of Muzurifa hummed with life, a vibrant tapestry of moving lights and distant sounds that felt a universe away from the silent, hollow cavern that had opened in his chest. Each gust of wind seemed to carry the echo of All Might's words, replaying them in a torturous loop inside his skull. It's not wrong to dream. However, you need to be realistic. The words had been delivered with a sad, paternal sort of kindness that made them cut 1,000 times deeper than any schoolyard taunt. This wasn't Kaken's explosive, thoughtless cruelty. This was the symbol of peace, the pillar of his entire world, gently dismantling the very foundation of his existence. He had offered Izuku his deepest, most vulnerable secret, the horrifying injury, the wisps of steam, the skeletal form, and in return, Izuku had offered him his dream. All Might had crushed it. Kindly, pragmatically, but utterly. Without a quirk, you cannot be a hero. Tears tracked clean paths through the grime on Izuku's cheeks, dripping from his chin to fall into the abyss. His knuckles were white where he gripped the cool metal of the safety fence. His hero analysis for the future, number 13 notebook lay open on the concrete a few feet away, its pages fluttering in the breeze. The ink on the fresh All Might signature was slightly smeared, a cruel souvenir from a shattered dream. He had always known, hadn't he? In the quiet moments, after the other children had called him Deku, after the doctors had shown his mother the X-ray of his foot with its extra joint, a biological death sentence for his aspirations, a small, cold voice had always whispered the truth, but he had silenced it with dazzling videos of All Might's debut, with frantic scribbling in his notebooks, with the sheer, stubborn force of his hope. Now that hope was gone. All Might himself had snuffed it out. The number one hero had confirmed what everyone else had always told him. He was useless. A Deku. His legs gave out. He didn't fall, but rather slid down the fence, his back scraping against the chain links until he was a miserable heap on the ground. He hugged his knees to his chest, a sob finally tearing its way out of his throat, raw and ragged. It was over. The 15-year-long fantasy that had been his only shield against reality had crumbled to dust. There was no path forward. There was nothing. He wasn't sure how long he sat there, adrift in a sea of gray despair. It could have been minutes, or an hour. The sun began to dip lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple that Izuku didn't see. Eventually, a distant explosion, sharp and percussive, broke through his stupor. It was followed by another. He didn't care. It was probably just another villain attack. A hero would handle it. A real hero. Not him. He numbly gathered his notebook, his movements slow and robotic. He had to go home. He had to face his mother, who would look at his tear-streaked face and know somehow that the last light of hope in her son's eyes had finally been extinguished. The thought was a fresh stab of pain. Trudging towards the rooftop access door, he heard the commotion growing louder from the street below. Shouts, sirens, the crackle of a fire. Curiosity, that old, familiar itch of the hero fanba, was a ghost of a sensation. He ignored it. He walked down the stairs, his feet heavy as lead, and pushed his way out into a back alley. The street ahead was blocked by a crowd of onlookers, their phones held high. And then he saw it. It was the same amorphous, putrid green form that had tried to suffocate him less than an hour ago. The sludge villain. It had escaped All Might. And it had found a new victim. A mess of spiky, ash-blonde hair flailed within the disgusting morass. Explosions erupted from the villain's body, wild and uncontrolled, setting fire to the surrounding storefronts. Kaken. Izuku's blood ran cold. The pro-heroes were there, Death Arms, Kamui Woods, Backdraft, but they were helpless. The villain's fluid body rendered brute force useless, the fire kept the wood-based hero at bay, and the hostage situation was too volatile. They were waiting for someone with the right quirk. They were all standing there. Watching. Just like he was, he saw Kaken's eyes. For the first time in his life, Izuku didn't see the arrogant, confident rival who had tormented him for a decade. He saw terror. Pure, undiluted panic. His friend, his tormentor, his oldest friend, was suffocating. He was dying, and Izuku's legs began to move. He didn't know why. His mind was screaming at him. Stop! What are you doing? You're quirkless. You'll die. All Might himself told you to stay away, but his body didn't listen. It burst from the crowd, a green and black blur of motion against a backdrop of paralyzed onlookers. The heroes shouted at him. Kid, no! Get back here! He didn't have a plan. He didn't have a quirk. All he had was a head full of useless analysis and a bright yellow backpack. Acting on pure, unadulterated instinct, he swung the bag from his shoulders and hurled it with all his might. It soared through the air and struck the villain squarely in its massive eye. The villain roared in pain and surprise, its gelatinous body flinching just enough to loosen its grip. For a split second, Bakugo's mouth and nose were free. He gasped a desperate, shuddering breath. Kaken! Izuku screamed, clawing uselessly at the sludge, his fingers sinking into the foul-smelling slime. I couldn't just stand there and watch you die. It was a pathetic, futile gesture. The villain's surprise turned to rage. A massive tendril of sludge coalesced, roaring as it swung down towards the small, quirkless boy who dared to defy it. The heroes were too far away. Bakugo's eyes widened in horror. This was it. This was how he died. A stupid, useless, heroic death. And then, the world changed. Time didn't stop. It thickened, slowing to the syrupy pace of a dream. The roar of the villain, the shouts of the crowd, the crackle of flames, it all receded, replaced by a profound, humming silence. A light began to bloom, not from an external source, but from within Izuku himself. It was a brilliant, warm, and ancient gold, the color of setting suns and liquid honey. It pushed outwards, effortlessly repelling the sludge, creating a perfect sphere of safety around him and Bakugo. With the light came a feeling. It wasn't a voice in his head, not words he could parse, but a wave of pure, divine comprehension that washed over his soul. It was a presence, overwhelmingly powerful, ancient beyond measure, and distinctly feminine. It felt like a queen, a mother, a goddess. I see you, child of man. The feeling was one of profound validation. This presence wasn't looking at his quirkless body or his scrawny frame. It was looking past all that, directly into his heart. It saw the years of quiet endurance, the relentless hope, the selfless core that had just propelled him into a fight he could never win. In a world where men crave power for its own sake, where strength is a tool for pride and dominance, you possess a different kind of might. The will to protect. The heart of a true guardian. The golden light intensified, becoming a blinding, beautiful nova. The sludge villain, the alley, the fires of Mizurufu, it all dissolved into whiteness. Izuku felt a sensation not of movement, but of transition, as if the very fabric of his reality was being unstitched and resewn around him. The feeling of the divine presence softened, leaving a final, resonant impression. The world of men has failed to forge you. Let the world of legends try. The light faded as quickly as it had appeared. The humming silence was replaced by the gentle shushing of waves against sand. The smell of smoke and sewage was gone, replaced by the clean, sharp scent of salt and blooming flowers. The oppressive heat of the fires was gone, replaced by the gentle warmth of an impossibly radiant sun. Izuku blinked, his eyes struggling to adjust. He was no longer in a grimy city alley. He was on a beach, a pristine, white sand beach that stretched in either direction, bordered by lush, green cliffs on one side and a turquoise sea so clear he could see the shapes of colorful fish darting beneath the surface on the other. In the distance, rising from the cliffs, were the gleaming white marble structures of a city that looked like it had been lifted from the pages of a Greek myth. He was on his hands and knees, the sand soft beneath his palms. He was alone. Kaken was gone. The villain was gone. What? Where? He whispered, his voice trembling. Was this the afterlife? Had the villain killed him after all? A shadow fell over him. He looked up. Standing before him were 5 women. They were tall, impossibly tall, all of them standing well over 6 feet, with skin the color of sun-warmed bronze and physiques that spoke of a lifetime of rigorous, disciplined training. They were clad in burnished bronze armor, leather tarages, and elegant greaves that gleamed in the sun. Each of them held an 8-foot spear and a round, concave shield. They moved with a predatory grace, their expressions a mixture of shock, suspicion, and outright hostility. The one at the forefront, a woman with fiery red hair braided down her back and a scar that cut across her lip, lowered the point of her spear until it was a mere inch from Izuku's throat. Tau sigma iota Tomicron, she snarled, her voice a low growl. The language was strange, musical yet harsh, and utterly alien to Izuku's ears. Izuku flinched back, throwing his hands up in a gesture of surrender. I don't understand. Please, I don't mean any harm. There was a villain, and a light, and... His frantic Japanese words were met with narrowed eyes and tighter grips on their weapons. A manling. Another one, a blonde with cold, calculating eyes, stated. On Themyscira. Impossible. The red-haired woman pressed her spear tip against his skin, not enough to break it, but enough to make her point. Impossible or not, it is here. It defiles this sacred soil with its presence. We should kill it and throw its body to the sea. Panic seized Izuku. He couldn't understand their words, but the murderous intent was a universal language. Tears welled in his eyes again, this time born of terror and confusion. Please, he begged. My name is Izuku Midoriya. I don't know how I got here. A third woman, this one with raven black hair that cascaded over her shoulders and eyes that held a spark of, not kindness, but curiosity, perhaps, stepped forward. She placed a restraining hand on the red-haired warrior's arm. Patience, Artemis, she said, her voice calm and melodic. It is but a boy, and he is terrified. He is no invader. Look at him, Artemis scoffed, but she didn't pull away. A boy grows into a man, Diana. The seed of corruption is the same. He must be judged by the queen. Diana nodded, her gaze softening slightly as she looked at the trembling, green-haired child before them. On that we agree. She looked down at Izuku and spoke slowly, pointing first to herself, then gesturing inland. Come, though he didn't know the word, the gesture was clear. Shakily, Izuku pushed himself to his feet, his legs feeling like jelly. Surrounded by the silent, imposing guard of warrior women, he was led away from the beach and up a winding marble staircase carved into the cliff face. The city was even more breathtaking up close. It was a marvel of Greco-Roman architecture, all white marble and soaring columns, but it was no ruin. It was alive. Fountains filled with crystal-clear water flowed in open courtyards. Lush gardens overflowed with impossible flowers. Other women, all clad in chitons or training gear, stopped and stared as he was marched through the streets, their whispers following him like the rustle of leaves. The hostility was a palpable force, a suffocating blanket of distrust and contempt. He was an anomaly, a stain on their perfect world. He was led to the largest structure, a magnificent open-air temple that served as a royal court. He was forced to his knees in the center of a vast, circular chamber. On a simple but elegant throne of carved white stone and gold sat a woman who radiated an authority that dwarfed all the others. She was beautiful, with regal features and long, dark hair streaked with silver, but her face was stern, etched with the wisdom and weariness of ages. This was a queen. This was Hippolyta. She looked down at the boy, her expression unreadable. To her left stood the curious woman, Diana. To her right stood the hostile warrior, Artemis. Another woman, older, with the sharp, intelligent eyes of a field commander, stood just behind the throne. This was General Philippus. Explain, Hippolyta commanded, her voice resonating with power. Artemis stepped forward, her voice ringing with conviction. He appeared on the shore, my queen. As if from thin air. A male. Here on Themyscira. It is an unprecedented violation of our most sacred law, a portent of doom. I say we dispense with him. A quick death is more mercy than the world of men ever showed us. A murmur of agreement went through the assembled Amazons. Diana countered, stepping forward to stand protectively in front of Izuku. My queen mother, look at him. He is a child. He speaks a tongue none of us have ever heard. He is lost and afraid, not malicious. He wears no armor, carries no weapon. How could he possibly be a threat to us? The smallest viper still carries venom, daughter. Artemis shot back. Men are a plague. Their world is one of war, greed, and chaos. We were granted this island to escape their corruption, not to welcome it to our shores. He did not ask to come here, Diana insisted. Something brought him here. Some power beyond our understanding. To kill him out of fear would be an act of cowardice, not strength. It would be a betrayal of our principles. The debate raged over Izuku's head. He could only watch, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He understood nothing but the tones, Artemis's fiery condemnation, Diana's passionate defense, the Queen's heavy silence. He felt like a piece of driftwood being fought over by titans, his fate hanging on words he couldn't comprehend. He kept his head bowed, his eyes fixed on the intricate mosaic of a kraken on the floor, trying to make himself as small as possible. Queen Hippolyta raised a hand, and the chamber fell silent. Her gaze, heavy with the weight of centuries, fell upon Izuku. She saw in him every flaw of his gender, the potential for the same weakness and violence that had driven her people into this gilded exile. The law is clear, she stated, her voice devoid of warmth. No man may set foot on Themyscira and live. It is a law born from the blood and tears of our sisters. It has kept us safe for 3,000 years. Diana's face fell. Artemis's lip curled into a grim, triumphant smirk. However, the Queen continued, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, your arrival is unnatural. You did not sail here. You did not find us by chance. Diana is right. A greater force is at play. She was about to question him, perhaps through some magical means, when a gasp echoed from the side of the chamber. An old Amazon, her eyes clouded with the milky white of a seer, stumbled forward. She was a priestess of the temple, a conduit for the gods. Her body began to tremble, and a golden light, the same warm, brilliant light from the alley, emanated from her eyes and mouth. Her voice, when she spoke, was not her own. It was a layered, divine chorus, the voice of the heavens speaking through a mortal vessel. Hear the words of Hera, Queen of Olympus, blessed patron of this isle. Every Amazon in the chamber, including Hippolyta, immediately dropped to one knee, their heads bowed in reverence. Only Izuku remained on his knees, staring in wide-eyed shock. The priestess turned her glowing eyes upon him. The manling is under my protection. I have seen his heart. In a world drowning in the hubris of power, his soul burns with the pure flame of sacrifice. He is not a threat, but a vessel. An opportunity. The divine voice swelled, filling the chamber with its undeniable power. The age of quirks has made mankind arrogant. Their greatest champions are defined by the power they wield, not the character they possess. This boy was deemed worthless by that world. I deem him worthy. The glowing gaze swept over the assembled Amazons. You shall not harm him. You shall train him. You will strip him of his mortal weakness and forge him in the crucible of Themyscira. Teach him your discipline. Teach him your skill. Teach him your philosophy of strength. He will become a champion of a new era, one who wields the compassion of the best of men with the unbreakable will of an Amazon. He is my will made flesh. Defy me at your peril. The golden light vanished. The priestess collapsed, caught by her sisters before she hit the floor. The divine presence was gone, but its decree hung in the air, thick and absolute. Silence. Slowly, Queen Hippolyta rose to her feet. Her face was a mask of stoic conflict. Her law, the foundation of their society, had been superseded by the direct command of her patron goddess. Her personal feelings were irrelevant. Her duty was clear. She looked at Izuku, her eyes no longer filled with simple contempt, but with a complex mixture of resentment, curiosity, and reluctant acceptance. The decree of the gods is law, she announced, her voice tight. The boy will remain. He will be trained as commanded. A wave of shock and dismay rippled through the Amazons. Artemis looked utterly betrayed, her hand clenching into a fist at her side. Hippolyta's gaze fell upon her daughter. Diana was looking at Izuku, her expression one of profound awe and vindication. She had sensed something special in him, and the highest authority in their pantheon had just confirmed it. Sensing her mother's internal struggle and seeing the terrified boy who was now their ward, Diana stepped forward and knelt before the throne. Mother, she said, her voice clear and steady, allow me to be his guide. I have walked in his world. I understand, in part, what he has lost and what he must now learn. I will take responsibility for his training and his integration into our ways. I will not fail you. And I will not fail the will of Lady Hera. Hippolyta studied her daughter for a long moment. She saw the earnestness, the strength, the compassion that made Diana her greatest pride and, at times, her greatest worry. She gave a single, sharp nod. Very well. He is your charge, Diana. His successes will be your own. As will his failures. Diana rose, a small, determined smile on her face. She turned to Izuku, who had watched the entire exchange with the wide, uncomprehending eyes of a lost animal. He had no idea what had just transpired, only that the immediate threat of death seemed to have passed. She walked over to him and knelt down, bringing herself to his eye level. The other Amazons watched with suspicion, but Diana ignored them. She offered him her hand, palm up. The gesture was universal. My name is Diana, she said softly, knowing he wouldn't understand the words but hoping he would understand the tone. You are safe now. Izuku stared at her outstretched hand, then up at her face. In her dark, kind eyes he saw the first glimmer of genuine warmth he had seen since arriving in this impossible, terrifying, beautiful place. After a moment's hesitation, he slowly, shakily, placed his small, trembling hand in hers. Her grip was firm, strong, and reassuring. For the first time since he had stood on that rooftop, the crushing weight in his chest lessened, just a fraction. He didn't know where he was, or why he was here, or what would become of him. But as he looked at the Amazon princess, a fledgling, impossible thought took root in the barren soil of his broken dreams. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe, just maybe, this was a beginning. The world Izuku Midoriya had been thrust into was one of overwhelming, monolithic grandeur. Diana led him from the royal court through streets paved with marble so white it hurt his eyes, past architecture that seemed sung from stone rather than built. There were no cars, no buzzing power lines, no garish advertisements, only the whisper of the wind through cypress trees, the musical laughter of women, and the rhythmic clang of steel on steel from distant training grounds. It was a paradise. And he was its soul and purity. His new quarters were simple, yet more beautiful than any room he had ever seen. It was a small, circular chamber carved into the same white rock, with an archway that opened onto a private balcony overlooking the sapphire sea. There was a simple bed with a woven blanket, a wooden table and chair, and a basin of fresh water. It was Spartan, but clean and peaceful. Diana had explained, through a combination of gestures and a few surprisingly well-spoken Japanese words she'd picked up during her time in man's world, that this would be his home. The first few days were a blur of profound dislocation. He was an alien specimen under a microscope. As he walked with Diana through the city, every head turned. The Amazons, strong, proud, and utterly self-sufficient, would stop their work, their conversations, their training, to stare. Their gazes were not friendly. They were a mixture of cold curiosity, open disdain, and outright suspicion. He was the Aren, the male, a creature of myth and ill-omen to their people. He learned to keep his eyes down, his shoulders hunched, his presence as small and unobtrusive as he could possibly make it. The language was the highest wall between them. Their tongue was a fluid, ancient form of Greek, and it flowed around him like a river, leaving him stranded on a silent island. Diana was his only bridge. She began teaching him basic words: chire, hello, Evcharisto, thank you, Nero, water, ponos, pain. He learned the last word very quickly. On the morning of the fourth day, his true test began. Diana led him not to the libraries or the gardens, but to the gymnasium, a vast, open field of packed earth that served as the primary training ground. Waiting for them, her arms crossed over her formidable chest plate, was the fiery-haired warrior from the beach. Artemis. Her scarred lip was curled in a permanent sneer, and her eyes held the cold, predatory light of a hawk sizing up a field mouse. Good morning, Artemis, Diana said, her voice betraying a slight tension. Is it? Artemis replied in her native tongue, her gaze fixed on Izuku. She looked him up and down, a process that made him feel like a particularly disappointing slab of meat. The goddess may have commanded we train the manling, but she did not say we had to enjoy it. Nor did she forbid me from breaking him. The sooner he fails, the sooner he can be sent away, and our island can be cleansed of his presence. Diana placed a comforting hand on Izuku's shoulder. Artemis will be overseeing your physical conditioning, she translated, diplomatically omitting the vitriol. She is our finest warrior and our most demanding instructor. Do as she says, Izuku. Try your best. Izuku nodded, his throat suddenly dry. He bowed his head low. Hajimashite. He stammered out of habit. It's a pleasure to meet you. I'll be in your care. Artemis just grunted. She pointed a single, imperious finger towards the towering mountain that loomed over the city, its peak shrouded in misty clouds. Run! She commanded. Diana translated. She wants you to run. To the first cliff shrine. She pointed to a small white speck, barely visible halfway up the mountainside. Izuku's eyes widened. That had to be several kilometers, and the incline looked terrifyingly steep. Oh, okay, he squeaked, his voice barely a whisper. I'll do my best. He took off at a jog, the way he'd seen athletes do on TV. He felt Artemis's gaze burning into his back. The first 100 meters on the flat ground of the gymnasium were fine. Then he hit the incline. The winding path that led up the mountain was not a gentle slope. It was a rugged, uneven trail of rock and dirt. Within minutes, his lungs were screaming for air. A stitch, sharp and hot as a knife, stabbed into his side. His legs, used to nothing more strenuous than a frantic dash from bullies, felt like they were filled with wet cement. The Amazons he passed along the way, some carrying heavy bundles of wood, others simply out for a leisurely stroll, moved with an effortless, loping grace. They barely seemed to be breathing hard. They glanced at the gasping, stumbling boy with expressions ranging from pity to amusement. He pushed on, his mind a mantra of, just a little further, just a little further. But his body betrayed him. His vision started to swim, black spots dancing at the edges. His legs finally gave out, and he collapsed onto the trail in a heap, his chest heaving, his throat raw. He had barely made it a quarter of the way. Footsteps, steady and powerful, crunched on the gravel behind him. He looked up to see Artemis standing over him, not a single drop of sweat on her brow. Her expression was one of profound, vindicated disgust. Pathetic, she said, the word dripping with contempt. Is this the champion of Hera? A wheezing foal that cannot even climb a hill? The men of your world must be made of glass. She didn't offer a hand. She didn't offer a word of encouragement. She just turned and started walking back down the mountain. Get up, manling. Your failure for the day is not yet complete. Izuku, his entire body trembling with exhaustion and humiliation, pushed himself back to his feet and stumbled after her. This was only the beginning. Artemis's training regimen was a symphony of brutal, soul-crushing toil, each movement designed to find his limit and violently shove him past it. She seemed to take a perverse pleasure in his weakness, in demonstrating the vast, unbridgeable chasm between an Amazon and a quirkless boy from modern Japan. The mountain run became a daily torture. Every morning, he would try, and every morning, he would fail at a different, yet equally pathetic, point along the path. After the run, there were the amphorae. He was tasked with carrying 2 massive, earthenware jugs filled with water from the mountain's spring back to the cisterns in the city. An Amazon warrior could carry 4 with ease. Izuku could barely lift 1. He would stagger under the weight, his spine screaming, his arms shaking, spilling most of the water before he even reached the halfway point. He would return with nearly empty jugs, his hands raw and blistered, only to be met with Artemis's cold glare and a simple command. Again. Then there was the gauntlet. It was an obstacle course built to test the agility and strength of Amazon recruits. He had to swing across chasms on thick ropes that tore the skin from his palms, scale sheer rock walls that left his nails broken and bloody, and crawl under nets while other Amazons, as part of their own training, fired blunted arrows that thudded into the ground around him, each one a sharp reminder of his slowness. He failed. He failed constantly, spectacularly, and publicly. He fell, he bled, he was pushed to the absolute brink of physical and mental exhaustion every single day. The other Amazons' initial curiosity hardened into a settled disdain. He was the queen's folly, the goddess's strange pet project. They saw his weakness not as something to be overcome, but as an indictment of his entire gender. Yet, through all the pain, the humiliation, and the endless failure, Izuku Midoriya did something that baffled his tormentor more than any feat of strength could have. He never quit. Every morning, before the sun had even fully risen, he would be at the edge of the gymnasium, his body a canvas of bruises and scrapes, his muscles screaming in protest, waiting for Artemis. Every time he fell on the mountain path, he would lay there for a moment, his lungs on fire, and then he would get back up, his face streaked with dirt and tears, and keep going until his body physically gave out. Every time he dropped the amphorae, he would go back to the spring, refill them, and try again. His quiet, stubborn refusal to break began to grate on Artemis. She had trained countless Amazon warriors. She knew how to shatter a spirit. She would mock his weakness, his origins, his very existence. She would call him Skaliki, worm, asthenia, weakness, anthropery, a derogatory term for a man. "Why do you even bother?" she snarled one afternoon, after he had spent an hour failing to climb a 10-foot wall, his fingers slipping on the holds time and time again. He was slumped at the base of the wall, breathing in ragged gasps. "You have no strength. No talent. You are nothing. Go back to your room and weep, boy. It is the only thing you are good at." Izuku looked up at her, his green eyes shimmering with unshed tears, but also with a flicker of something else. A fire that she had been trying her hardest to extinguish, but which only seemed to burn brighter with every failure. "I can still do more," he wheezed in his broken, heavily accented Greek, a phrase he had practiced with Diana. He placed his torn hands back on the wall and tried to pull himself up again. His muscles screamed, his body refused, and he slid back down. But he had tried. Artemis stared at him, a flicker of something other than contempt in her eyes for the first time. It was confusion. It was frustration. She wanted him to curse her, to fight back, to surrender. This quiet, infuriating persistence was something new. He wasn't strong, that was certain. But she was beginning to suspect he might be unbreakable, and that, to a warrior like Artemis, was a concept both alien and deeply unsettling. The evenings were his sanctuary. They were the cool, soothing balm applied to the raw, open wounds of the day. After Artemis was finished with him, he would limp to the healer's pavilion, a quiet space filled with the scent of medicinal herbs and the gentle murmur of fountains. And Diana would be there, waiting. She would sit with him in silence at first, her presence alone a comfort. She would take a bowl of a fragrant, green-colored salve and gently tend to his injuries. She would clean the scrapes, bind the blisters on his hands, and massage the potent ointment into his bruised muscles. The salve tingled, cool at first, then warming, sinking deep into his aching tissues and easing the fire of his exertion. Her touch was gentle but firm, the practiced care of someone who understood injury and recovery intimately. It was during these quiet moments that his true education began. "She is not cruel for the sake of it, Izuku," Diana said one evening, dabbing a soft cloth on a cut on his forehead. He had tripped and fallen during a balance beam exercise, much to the amusement of the onlookers. "Artemis believes that the body is a shell, and the will is the pearl within. She is trying to break the shell to see if there is anything of value inside. It feels like she just wants to break the shell," Izuku mumbled, wincing as she cleaned the wound. Diana smiled sadly. "For her, that is the same thing. For an Amazon, a will that can be broken is a will not worth having. She pushes you because the goddess commanded it, but she also pushes you because she cannot comprehend a male possessing a warrior spirit. You are challenging the foundations of her world just by continuing to stand up every morning." He looked down at his bandaged hands. They were a mess of calluses, new blisters, and half-healed cuts. They didn't look like the hands of a hero. "In your world," Diana continued, her voice soft and melodic, "strength is a gift, is it not? A quirk. You are either born with it or you are not. It creates a hierarchy of power based on chance." Izuku nodded, thinking of Kaken's explosive power, of All Might's overwhelming might, and of his own empty slot in that genetic lottery. "Yes. The stronger your quirk, the greater a hero you can be." "We do not see it that way," she said, her expression serious. "Here, strength, what we call oridi, is not a gift. It is a pursuit. It is a duty. It is not something you have, it is something you build, Every single day, through toil and discipline, she gestured around them, to the setting sun painting the sky in fiery colors. An Amazon's strength is not in her arm alone. It is in the sister who stands beside her in the phalanx. It is in the wisdom of our generals. It is in the skill of our smiths and the knowledge of our scholars. It is a responsibility we all share, to protect this island, to protect our way of life, to protect each other. Power for its own sake, for individual glory, that is a man's vanity, and it is the cause of all the world's suffering. The words sank into Izuku's mind, finding fertile ground in his analytical nature. He had always seen strength as a single, quantifiable thing, the power to punch a villain. All might was the strongest, therefore he was the best. But Diana was describing something else entirely. A strength that was communal, multifaceted, and rooted in purpose rather than ability. So, my quirklessness, Izuku began, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. Here, it doesn't matter as much? It does not matter at all, Diana said firmly, meeting his gaze. We have no quirks. All that you see, the strength of Artemis, the speed of our runners, the skill of our archers, it is all earned, forged in this very crucible you are now experiencing. What matters is what is in here. She gently tapped his chest, right over his heart. The will. The spirit. The thumos. That is the source of all true power. Artemis cannot see it yet, but I do. Lady Hera did. It is why you are here. These conversations became the pillar he clung to. Diana's words reframed his suffering. The daily agony at the hands of Artemis was no longer a punishment for his weakness. It was the forging process Diana had described. Every failed run up the mountain was not a confirmation of his uselessness, but a single hammer blow shaping his will. Every dropped amphora was a test of his resolve to pick it up again. He began to absorb the Amazon philosophy, not just with his mind, but with his very being. He started to see the world through their eyes. He watched the coordinated dance of the warriors practicing shield formations and saw Diana's words about communal strength made manifest. He saw the respect given to the elder craftswomen and understood that their skill was as valued as any warrior's prowess. His analytical mind, once used solely for dissecting hero fights, found a new purpose. During his torturous runs, he stopped focusing on the pain and started analyzing his own form. My posture is wrong. I'm leaning too far forward, wasting energy. Control my breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Shorten my stride on the incline. His mutterstorms, once a source of mockery in his old life, became a tool for internal correction, a quiet litany of self-improvement. Lift with the legs, not the back. Grip the rope with the calluses, not the raw skin. When you fall, fall with the momentum. Roll, don't just hit the ground. He was still failing. He was still weak. The gap between him and the Amazons remained a vast, yawning canyon. But the quality of his failure was changing. He was starting to fail better. A month into his training, something shifted. He was on the mountain path. It was his 30th attempt. The sun was hot, the air was thin, and his body was a familiar symphony of aches. But this time, something was different. His breathing was more controlled. His stride was more efficient. He passed the point where he'd collapsed the day before, and the day before that. He kept going, his eyes fixed on the small white shrine that had once seemed as distant as the moon. His legs were burning, his lungs were screaming, but his will, forged in the fires of 1,000 failures and tempered by Diana's wisdom, was a core of cold, hard iron inside him. He didn't stop. He pushed past the pain, past the exhaustion, until he was finally standing on the precipice before the shrine. He collapsed onto the ground, his body shaking uncontrollably, but he was there. He had made it. He looked back down the winding path, a dizzying view of the city and the sea spread out below him. A single, ragged sob of triumph escaped his lips. He heard a slow, deliberate crunch of footsteps behind him. He expected it to be Diana, coming to congratulate him. But it was Artemis. She stood there, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She looked at the heaving, sweat-soaked boy, then at the path he had just conquered. She said nothing for a long, heavy moment. Izuku braced himself for a dismissive comment, for her to tell him that any Amazon child could have done it in half the time. Instead, she simply unhooked a leather water skin from her belt and tossed it onto the ground beside him. "Drink," she said, her voice flat and devoid of its usual venom. "We begin again at dawn. You were slow." And with that, she turned and began her descent. Izuku stared at the water skin as if it were a holy relic. It wasn't praise. It wasn't kindness. But it was acknowledgement. It was the first time she had ever offered him anything other than contempt. It was a concession, a warrior's grudging respect for a spirit that refused to be broken. That evening, as Diana tended to the fresh set of scrapes on his elbows, Izuku was unusually quiet. His body ached more than ever, but for the first time, it was the ache of accomplishment, not just of failure. "Diana-sensei," he said, his Greek still clumsy but improving daily. "What Artemis does, the training, it's to make us strong enough to protect Themyscira, yes?" "Yes," Diana affirmed. "To protect our home and our sisters. But, in my world," he struggled for the words. "Heroes fight villains. They defeat them. They win. That is what it means to be strong there. To overpower the enemy." He thought of All Might's thunderous punches, of Endeavor's infernos. "And what does that victory accomplish?" Diana asked gently. It stops the villain. It saves people," Izuku replied, echoing the dogma he had believed his entire life. "For a time," Diana countered. "But does it change the heart of the villain? Does it prevent the next one from rising? Your world is full of powerful individuals, Izuku, yet it is drowning in conflict. Perhaps victory is not about overpowering another. Perhaps true strength, true arete, lies not in winning a fight, but in ensuring a fight is no longer necessary." Izuku looked at his bandaged hands, then at Diana's serene face. The concept was so alien, so contrary to everything he had ever been taught about heroism. A hero who didn't win, a strength that wasn't for defeating enemies? His journey in the crucible was far from over. He was still weak, still clumsy, still an outsider. But as he sat there, the goddess's decree echoed in his memory. A champion of a new era. For the first time, he began to understand that it didn't mean becoming a new All Might. It meant becoming something else entirely. Something forged here, in the heart of Themyscira, where strength was not a power, but a purpose. And his purpose was just beginning to take shape. 6 months had passed since Izuku Midoriya's arrival on Themyscira. 6 months of fire and forge, of pain and persistence. The boy who had arrived as a bundle of trembling nerves and apologies had been stripped down to his very essence, and was now being rebuilt, day by grueling day. The mountain was no longer an insurmountable titan, but a familiar adversary. He could now make the run to the first shrine without collapsing, his breathing controlled, his stride even. He still wasn't as fast as the youngest Amazon recruits, but he was no longer an object of pity or scorn. The water amphorae, once impossible burdens, were now manageable. He could carry them from the spring to the cistern without spilling more than a few drops, his back and legs now corded with lean, hard-earned muscle. His body, once soft and undefined, was becoming a testament to Artemis's relentless crucible. It was a cartographer's map of his journey, etched with the fine white lines of healed cuts, the tough landscape of calluses on his hands and feet, and the faint mottling of old bruises. Artemis herself had changed. Her open hostility had curdled into a kind of severe, demanding pragmatism. Her insults were no longer about his gender or his origins. They were sharp, technical critiques. "Your footing was sloppy on that turn, boy. You lost a full second. You are still holding your breath on the final lift. Inefficient. Breathe through the exertion. Better. But better is not good enough." Again, it was the demanding bark of a drill sergeant, not the dismissive sneer of an executioner. For Izuku, it felt like the highest praise. He had earned her professional respect, if not her affection. He had proven that the shell, as Diana had called it, was not so easily broken. And more importantly, he had proven that the pearl within, his indomitable will, was genuine. It was on a particularly sweltering afternoon, after a session of spear-throwing practice where Izuku had finally managed to consistently hit the outer ring of the target, that his world expanded once more. Diana approached as Artemis was ordering Izuku to collect the scattered spears. "He has the Thumos, Artemis," Diana said, her voice low and proud. His spirit is strong. No one can deny that now, Artemis grunted, watching Izuku jog across the field. She didn't contradict Diana. The spirit is the engine. But an engine without a driver is just a loud noise. It is time he learned to steer, Diana smiled. I agree. His mind is his sharpest, most neglected weapon. The Queen has given her consent. It is time for him to meet the general. Artemis nodded once, a sharp, decisive gesture. Philippus will either forge him into a razor or shatter him completely. There is no middle ground with her, Izuku returned, his arms full of bronze-tipped spears. Diana gave him a warm smile. Your physical conditioning will continue every morning, Izuku. But your afternoons will now be spent elsewhere. There is another side to the Amazon way you must learn. He was led away from the sun-baked earth of the gymnasium, away from the familiar ache of his muscles and the scent of sweat and steel. They walked through the heart of the city, towards a severe, windowless building that stood apart from the more ornate temples and residences. It was built of a darker, gray-veined marble, solid and unyielding. The entrance was flanked not by statues of goddesses, but by simple, unadorned columns. This was the Strategion, the tactical heart of Themyscira. The air inside was cool and still, carrying the scent of old parchment, oiled leather, and dry sand. The chamber was circular, its walls lined with shelves holding countless scrolls and leather-bound codices. Maps of the island, the surrounding seas, and lands Izuku didn't recognize were hung like tapestries. But the centerpiece, dominating the room, was a massive, circular sand table. It was a miniature, perfectly rendered topographical map of Themyscira, complete with tiny, carved forests, mountains, and rivers. A woman stood with her back to them, contemplating the table. She was tall, even by Amazon standards, with short-cropped, practical black hair threaded with silver at the temples. Her armor was functional, not ceremonial, its bronze worn smooth in places from decades of use. She was not as explosively powerful-looking as Artemis, nor as ethereally graceful as Diana. She possessed a stillness, a coiled tension, like a leopardess at rest. When she turned, her eyes were the most striking thing about her. They were a dark, penetrating brown, and they seemed to take in everything at once, assessing, calculating, missing nothing. This was General Philippus, Hippolyta's most trusted commander, and the architect of every Amazon victory for the last 2,000 years. Her gaze fell upon Izuku, and for a terrifying moment, he felt utterly transparent. It was a different kind of scrutiny from Artemis's. Artemis had judged his body. Philippus seemed to be dissecting his very thoughts. General Philippus, Diana said with a respectful bow of her head. This is Izuku Midoriya. Philippus's eyes narrowed slightly. The manling? She stated, her voice a low, calm contralto. It held neither Artemis's heat nor Diana's warmth. It was the voice of pure, dispassionate analysis. Hera's project. I have seen you running the mountain. Your form is improving, but your center of gravity is too high. A waste of energy. Izuku flinched, instinctively bowing. Gomen nasai, I am sorry. I will work on it, ma'am. Philippus ignored his apology. Her attention was on the process, not the sentiment. The Queen has decreed that I am to assess your tactical acumen. If any exists, she gestured to a simple wooden stool near the wall. Sit. Observe. And do not speak unless spoken to. For the first week, that was all he did. He sat on that stool for hours, watching as Philippus and her lieutenants planned border patrols, ran logistical exercises, and simulated responses to potential threats. A Kraken attack from the sea, a Harpy incursion from the northern peaks. They used carved wooden blocks to represent their forces, moving them across the sand table with long, slender rods. They spoke in a rapid, technical dialect of their language, filled with terms for formations and maneuvers he didn't understand. It was overwhelming, but also fascinating. His analytical mind, the part of him that loved to deconstruct hero fights, was captivated. He saw them practice flanking maneuvers, set up kill boxes, and debate the merits of a defensive shield wall versus a rapid phalanx charge. He was witnessing the living, breathing art of war. During a break one afternoon, while Philippus was consulting a scroll, Izuku pulled a familiar, slightly battered object from the satchel Diana had given him. His hero analysis for the future. No. 13 notebook. It was his last tangible link to his old dream, a comfort object in this strange new world. He opened it to a blank page and, out of habit, began to sketch. It wasn't a hero this time. It was a rough diagram of the phalanx formation he had just seen, with notes, scrawled in Japanese in the margins, questioning its effectiveness against an enemy with aerial capabilities. "What is that?" The voice, calm and close, made him jump so violently he nearly dropped the notebook. Philippus was standing right behind him, her shadow falling over the page. Izuku's face went crimson. He snapped the book shut, hugging it to his chest as if it were a state secret. "And nothing! It's nothing, General! Just childish scribbles. I'm sorry!" he stammered, mortified. This was his geeky, obsessive hobby. To an ancient, legendary general, it must seem utterly pathetic. Philippus's expression didn't change. She simply held out her hand. "Let me see it." It was not a request. With trembling hands, Izuku surrendered his precious notebook. He felt as though he had just handed over his own diary. Philippus took the book. Her callous thumb brushed over the crudely drawn number 13 on the cover. She opened it, her eyebrows raising slightly at the colorful, dynamic, and admittedly amateurish drawings of costumed figures. She saw pages filled with dense, frantic Japanese script, arrows, and diagrams. She flipped through the sketches of Mount Lady, Kamui Woods, and a dozen other heroes. Her face remained a stony mask, but Izuku could feel a wave of disappointment coming from her. He wanted the ground to swallow him whole. "This is how you spend your time?" she asked, her voice flat. "Fantasies of men in garish costumes?" She was about to hand it back, to dismiss it and him along with it, when she paused. She had landed on a specific page, one he had worked on for weeks before coming here. The drawing was less flamboyant. It depicted a man with wild black hair, tired eyes, and a long, scarf-like weapon. Eraserhead. Philippus couldn't read the text, but she recognized the nature of the drawing. It wasn't a heroic pose. It was a series of diagrams showing lines of sight, fields of vision, and the effective range of his capture weapon. It was analytical. She looked at Diana, who had been watching from the doorway. "Translate this page." Diana came over and looked at the page. She began to read Izuku's neat, slightly cramped katakana and kanji. "Hero, Eraserhead. Quirk, Erasure." Diana translated slowly. "Quirk allows him to temporarily nullify another person's quirk by looking at them. A powerful tool for neutralizing emitter and transformation types. However, its effectiveness is limited by several factors." Philippus's eyes narrowed, a flicker of genuine interest showing for the first time. Diana continued. "Weakness 1. The effect breaks when he blinks. This gives him a limited window of attack and makes him vulnerable to prolonged fights or multiple opponents. Weakness 2. It is ineffective against mutant-type quirks that cause permanent physical alteration. Weakness 3. Dry eye is a significant combat liability. Below that, he has analyzed his equipment," Diana said, pointing to a sketch of the capture weapon. "Capture weapon, a cloth woven from steel wire alloy, is used to compensate for his lack of a direct combat quirk. It is a tool for immobilization and mobility, not for offense." Conclusion. His fighting style is not one of overwhelming power, but of stealth, strategy, and quirk suppression. He wins by creating an opportunity, not by forcing one. The room was silent. Philippus stared at the notebook, then at Izuku, who was currently trying to merge with the stone wall. She flipped to another page, one depicting the wooden hero, Kamui Woods. "This one." Diana peered at it. "Hero, Kamui Woods. Quirk Arbor. A powerful quirk for large-scale capture and mobility. His lacquered chain prison is an effective area of effect restraint. However, he has a critical, exploitable weakness to fire. His attacks are large and sweeping, which makes him predictable. A smaller, faster opponent who can get inside his effective range before he can react would have a significant advantage." Philippus slowly closed the notebook. She looked at Izuku not as a boy, not as a manling, but as something else entirely. She saw past the childish drawings, past the foreign script, and saw the mind behind them. A mind that, with no formal training, instinctively performed threat assessments, identified strategic weaknesses, and theorized counters. He wasn't just a fanboy. He was a natural-born military analyst. She handed the notebook back to Izuku, who took it with a fumbling hand. "Diana," Philippus said, her voice holding a new and unnerving weight. "Your mentorship of his heart is vital. Artemis is forging his body into steel." She turned her full attention to Izuku, her gaze intense and sharp as a razor. "But his mind belongs to me now." Izuku's education transformed overnight. The stool in the corner was forgotten. He was now an active participant in the strategian. His mornings were still a crucible of sweat and pain with Artemis, but his afternoons became a crucible of the mind. His first lessons were in history. Philippus did not believe in tactics without context. He was given scrolls detailing the great battles of Amazon history, with Diana patiently translating for him. He read about the Battle of the Cursed Shore, where a small Amazon force used the rising tide and hidden reefs to destroy a fleet of invading marauders twice their size. He studied the Gorgon Wars, learning how the Amazons used mirrored shields and coordinated movements not to fight the petrifying gaze, but to redirect it, turning the enemy's greatest strength into its own downfall. Philippus would then grill him, connecting the ancient lessons to his world. "You read of the Gorgon, Steno," she would say, pointing to a map. Her gaze was her power. "We did not challenge it head-on. We made it irrelevant. Now, tell me of the villain in your world called Muscular. Your notes say he armors his body with his own muscle fibers, making him impervious to brute force. How would a team of heroes with non-physical quirks defeat him? Apply the lesson of the Gorgon." Izuku, initially hesitant, would find his footing. His muttering would start, the familiar storm of analysis he had practiced his whole life, now being honed into a weapon. "You wouldn't fight the muscles, that's his strength. You'd target his weaknesses. His footing, his breathing. A hero with a water quirk could make the ground slick, ruining his balance. One with an earth quirk could create pitfalls to trap his legs. He needs oxygen. A hero with a smoke or gas-based quirk could incapacitate him without a single punch. You don't break the shield. You defeat the man carrying it." A flicker of approval would cross Philippus's face. "Correct. You do not play the enemy's game. You force him to play yours." Next came the sand table. He was no longer an observer. Philippus would set up scenarios for him, giving him command of a small contingent of Amazon warriors represented by carved blocks of wood. His first attempts were disastrous. Tasked with defending a mountain pass from a harpy attack, he instinctively positioned his strongest unit, a block representing an elite hoplite squad, at the very front. "Wrong," Philippus said calmly, sweeping the hoplite block off the table with a rod. "The harpies are an aerial force. Your hoplites are useless against them. You have exposed your archers, who are your only viable weapon. They are slaughtered in the first pass. Your entire force is routed. These sisters are dead, Izuku. Because you were impatient. Because you relied on a false notion of strength. Learn from it. Begin again." The lesson was harsh, but it stuck. He learned to value every piece, to see the battlefield as a complex geometric puzzle. He learned to use terrain, to position his archers on high ground, to use his hoplites as a defensive wall to protect his assets rather than as a battering ram. He learned about flanking maneuvers, perikyklosi, feigned retreats, ipikorisai, and the critical importance of supply lines. He filled notebooks, new ones, made of fine Amazon parchment, with tactical diagrams. His frantic scribbles became neat, precise notations. His childish hero drawings were replaced by topographical maps and unit symbols. He wasn't just analyzing heroes anymore. He was learning to command them. Philippus pushed him relentlessly. She gave him scenarios based on the quirks from his notebooks. A villain who can teleport is attacking a civilian center. Your hero team consists of one with super speed, one who can create force fields, and one who can manipulate light. Go. Izuku would pace around the table, his mind racing. The teleporter is a mobility threat. You can't pin him down. So you restrict his options. The force field hero doesn't create a wall. They create a dome over the civilians, a safe zone. The speedster doesn't try to catch the villain. They act as a high-speed shepherd, herding him, cutting off his teleportation destinations by being there first. The light manipulator isn't for offense. They create blinding flashes, disorienting the villain, making it harder for him to choose his teleportation spots accurately. It's a strategy of containment and control, not elimination. Slowly but surely, he was internalizing the core of Amazonian military philosophy. Strength was not about a single, powerful strike. It was about control, strategy, and the flawless coordination of different skills to achieve a single objective. It was about making victory inevitable long before the first sword was drawn. His final test came 2 months into his strategic training. He walked into the Strategian one afternoon to find Philippus standing before the sand table, which was configured in a way he had never seen. A massive, walled fortress was set against a mountain range, with only one heavily fortified gate. A sea of crudely carved, monstrous figures, chimeras, with the heads of lions, bodies of goats, and tails of serpents, surrounded it. A tiny contingent of Amazon blocks was holed up inside. "The siege of the adamantine gate," Philippus said, her voice grim. "One of the few great losses in our history." A force of 500 sisters, led by the great Myrine, was besieged by a horde of 5,000 chimeras. They held the gate for 3 days and 3 nights. On the 4th day, the gate was breached. Myrine and 300 of her warriors fell, creating a passage for the survivors to escape through the mountains. They fought with honor and died with glory. History calls it a noble defeat. She looked at Izuku, her eyes like chips of flint. "I call it a failure of imagination. Your task is this. History says this was a defeat. Show me a victory." For 3 days, Izuku barely left the Strategian. He ate his meals at the sand table, his eyes tracing the paths, the fortifications, the positions of the enemy. He filled pages with calculations and failed strategies. A direct sally from the gate was suicide. Trying to outlast the siege was impossible. The scrolls said the chimeras did not need to eat or sleep. Using the walls for defense was a losing battle of attrition. He was stuck. He was trying to win the battle Myrine had fought. He was trying to fight the enemy on their terms. You do not play the enemy's game. You force him to play yours. The words echoed in his head. He stopped looking at the battle and started looking at the problem. Why were the chimeras there? The scrolls described them as unnaturally aggressive, drawn to the fortress with a singular purpose. But why? He scoured the historical accounts Diana translated for him, looking for any detail, any anomaly. He found it in a footnote, a minor detail in the manifest of the fortress's supplies. The adamantine gate was not just a fortress. It was a storage depot for a rare, potent herb used in healing salves. An herb that, when burned, released a scent that was known to drive certain magical beasts into a frenzy. The fortress wasn't being attacked. It was being baited. The chimeras weren't an army. They were hungry animals drawn to a food source. He had his answer. He called for Philippus. She entered the Strategian to find Izuku standing over the table, his eyes bright with a fire she had never seen in him before. "The battle for the gate is a diversion," Izuku said, his voice steady and confident. He used a rod to point to the main gate, where the bulk of the chimera force was clustered. "We give them the fight they expect. Myrine leads a small, elite force to hold the gate, to make as much noise and chaos as possible." A feint. He then traced a path along the back of the fortress, up a series of treacherous-looking cliffs on the sand table. "But the real battle is here. Myrine's second-in-command leads a team of 5 of their fastest, most agile warriors. They do not engage. They climb. They infiltrate the fortress from the rear, where the chimeras are sparse. Their target is not the enemy. It is the storeroom." He looked up at Philippus, his green eyes burning with intensity. "They burn the herbs. They destroy the bait. With their prize gone, the chimeras have no reason to remain. Their frenzy will break. They will disperse. The siege ends not with a clash of armies, but with a puff of smoke. The survivors of the feint at the gate retreat, and the entire force escapes. Total losses, maybe a dozen warriors, not 300. It is not a glorious victory. It is a smart one." Philippus was silent for a long time, her gaze moving from Izuku to the sand table and back again. The corners of her mouth, which Izuku had only ever seen set in a firm, straight line, slowly, almost imperceptibly, turned upwards. A small, genuine smile of profound professional satisfaction. "You have learned Izuku Midoriya," she said, her voice filled with a deep, resonant approval. "You did not win the battle they expected you to fight. You won the war by making the battle irrelevant." That evening, Izuku sat on his balcony, looking out at the stardusted sea. His muscles ached from his morning with Artemis, a familiar, comforting pain. But there was a new sensation, a pleasant exhaustion behind his eyes, the feeling of a mind pushed to its limits and found capable. He looked down at his hands. The calluses from the spears and ropes were thick and hard, but his fingertips were stained with charcoal from the maps and diagrams of the strategian. He was being forged, body and mind, in the twin fires of Amazonian discipline. The quirkless, crying boy who dreamed of being a hero like All Might seemed like a person from another lifetime. That boy had believed strength was the power to punch through a problem. The boy he was becoming, Izuku of Themyscira, was learning a far more profound truth. True strength was the wisdom to see a problem from all sides, and the cleverness to solve it without a single punch. A new kind of power was growing within him, quiet and sharp as a blade in the dark. The power not just to fight, but to think. The victory at the sand table marked a profound shift in Izuku's existence on Themyscira. He had arrived a pariah, become a project, and then evolved into a curiosity. Now, he was something more. In the eyes of the Amazonian High Command, he was an asset. A council was held in Hippolyta's private solar, a sun-drenched chamber overlooking the city. The queen sat, her expression as serene and immutable as a marble statue. At her side stood Philippus, her arms crossed, a rare glint of pride in her analytical eyes. Artemis leaned against a column, her usual fiery impatience tempered by a grudging respect. And Diana stood before them, her face beaming with a gentle, proprietary pride. "The boy has a will of iron," Artemis conceded, her voice a low rumble. It was the first compliment, however backhanded, that Izuku had ever received from her. "We have hammered it daily, and it has not cracked. It only grows harder." "He has more than that," Philippus countered, her voice calm and precise. "He has a mind like a razor. He sees the battlefield not as a glorious chaos, but as a series of interlocking problems to be solved." He dismantled the historical dilemma of the adamantine gate not with bravado, but with logic. "I have taught him strategy, but his instinct for it is something innate. A true gift." Hippolyta's gaze rested on her daughter. "You have nurtured his heart, Diana. Artemis has forged his body. Philippus has sharpened his mind. He has the spirit of a guardian and the mind of a general. But these things are the components of a weapon, not the weapon itself. A warrior without the skill to apply his will is a banner without an army. It is time for him to learn how to fight." Diana bowed her head. "I agree, mother. His foundations are strong. It is time to build the warrior upon them, then it falls to you," Hippolyta decreed. "Artemis has given him the strength to endure a blow. Philippus has given him the wisdom to avoid it. You will give him the skill to answer it. Take him to the palestra. Teach him our way. The true art of the Amazon." A shadow of a smile touched the queen's lips, a rare and momentous sight. "And it would not do for a champion of Hera to train with splintered wood and blunted bronze. I have made a request. A gift is being prepared for him. To protect a boy with such a powerful desire to protect others." The palestra was different from the sprawling, sun-baked earth of the gymnasium. It was a more intimate space of combat, a collection of sand-filled wrestling pits, weapon racks gleaming with deadly artistry, and stone floors worn smooth by millennia of sparring. Here, the broad strokes of physical conditioning gave way to the fine, deadly art of personal combat. His teacher was no longer Artemis, the roaring furnace, but Diana, the master artisan. Her approach was entirely different. Where Artemis had used mockery and brute force to push him, Diana used patience and precision. "Amazonian martial arts are not about overpowering an opponent," she explained on their first day, her bare feet making no sound on the cool stone floor. "Our ancestors fought hydras, minotaurs, and giants. Brute force was a luxury we could not afford. Our fighting style is one of leverage, momentum, and economy of motion. It is the art of turning an enemy's strength into their own undoing." They began with Pancration, the ancient, all-encompassing unarmed combat style. It was a brutal, beautiful dance of wrestling, grappling, and striking. Diana taught him the stances, the footwork, the way to generate power from his hips, not just his shoulders. She showed him how to break holds, how to apply joint locks, and how to unbalance a larger opponent with a subtle shift in weight. This was where Izuku's newfound physical strength met the first true wall of his training. His body was strong, yes, but it was a clumsy strength. He was a machine of disconnected parts. His mind, honed to a razor's edge by Philippus, was now his greatest enemy. He tried to think his way through the fight. She is shifting her weight to her left foot. His inner analyst would mutter. That telegraphs a right-handed strike. According to Philippus's teachings, the correct counter is to pivot away and strike at her exposed flank. But by the time his brain had processed the information and sent the command, Diana's hand had already tapped him gently on the solar plexus, a blow that would have knocked the wind out of him had she used even a fraction of her true strength. He would stumble, his carefully constructed mental flowchart of the fight crumbling to dust. You are still on the sand table, Izuku, Diana said gently, helping him to his feet after she had effortlessly used his own lunging punch to throw him into a sand pit. You are trying to command the fight from above. But a duel is not a battle map. A map is static. A fight is a river, constantly flowing, constantly changing. You are trying to command the river. You must become the river. He didn't understand. He would try again, focusing harder, analyzing faster, but the result was the same. His movements were jerky, telegraphed, a series of disconnected calculations. He knew the theory perfectly. He could have written a detailed treatise on the biomechanics of a perfect throw. But he couldn't perform one. He was a library of combat knowledge trapped in a body that didn't know how to read. Frustration began to gnaw at him, a feeling he hadn't experienced since his earliest days on the mountain. He had conquered his body's weakness, he had conquered his mind's limitations, but he couldn't conquer this disconnect. He was a general who couldn't wield a sword, a strategist who tripped over his own feet. A week into his combat training, they were called to the central armory, the Hoplithique. It was a grand, vaulted chamber where the legendary weapons of the Amazons were kept, each one a piece of history. But today, the center of the room was empty save for a single, unadorned pedestal of black obsidian. Queen Hippolyta stood waiting for them, flanked by Philippus and Artemis. As Izuku and Diana entered, the air in the room grew heavy, charged with a strange, static electricity. A low hum, like the sound of a great furnace from a vast distance, filled the chamber. A point of brilliant white light, brighter than a welder's torch, appeared above the pedestal. It descended slowly, resolving itself into two distinct shapes, shimmering with celestial heat. The light faded, leaving behind two objects that seemed to drink the torchlight from the walls. A gift, Hippolyta said, her voice resonating with reverence. From Lord Hephaestus, the smith of the gods, by my request. Forged for you, Izuku of Themyscira. For the protector. Izuku approached the pedestal as if in a dream. The first object was a shield. It was a medium-sized, circular aspis, about 2 feet in diameter. It was made of a metal he had never seen before, a celestial bronze that seemed to shift between shades of gold, copper, and bronze in the flickering light. Its surface was not perfectly smooth but bore the subtle, overlapping marks of a divine hammer, like ripples on a pond. In its center was a masterfully engraved device. A stylized gorgon's head, its serpentine hair writhing, its eyes wide in a silent, protective scream. It felt ancient and alive. The Aegis Minor, Diana whispered, her voice filled with awe. A lesser cousin to the shield of Athena. It is lighter than any mortal shield, yet stronger than diamond. It is not made merely to block, but to receive. It can absorb the kinetic force of any blow and hold it within its core, or redirect it. Izuku reached out a trembling hand and touched its surface. It was cool to the touch, and the hum he had heard before now vibrated through his very bones. A sense of immense, unyielding safety radiated from it. The second gift was a sword. It was a Xiphos, the classic leaf-bladed short sword of the ancient world, its design brutally simple and lethally effective. The hilt was wrapped in dark, supple leather, and the pommel was a simple, weighted sphere of the same celestial bronze. But the blade, The blade was extraordinary. It held a faint, internal luminescence, a soft, silver light. One edge, the primary cutting edge, shimmered with a pale, ethereal blue energy. The Stygius, Hippolyta announced. Named for the river of oaths. A blade for one who does not wish to kill. Its edge is enchanted. She pointed to the blue shimmering side. This is the edge of mercy, against a mortal of good heart, or one you do not intend to truly harm. It will not cut. It will deliver a powerful concussive shock, enough to shatter bone or fell a giant, but it will not spill blood. It is a weapon of subjugation, not destruction. Her expression grew stern. But do not mistake it for a toy. She indicated the back edge of the blade, which held a sharper, more solid light. This is the edge of judgment. Should you face a true monster, a creature of pure malice, or should you wield it with lethal intent in your heart, it will be as sharp and as final as any blade in this armory. Its nature is bound to the wielder's will. Izuku stared at the weapons, his heart pounding in his chest. A shield that could absorb the force of a superpowered punch. A sword that could incapacitate without killing. These weren't just weapons, they were tools. They were the perfect tools for the kind of hero he was beginning to believe he could be. He felt a wave of dizzying vertigo. He, the quirkless, useless Deku, was being given gifts from a god. I can't, he whispered, taking a step back. I'm not worthy of them. Diana placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Hephaestus forges tools for a purpose, Izuku. He would not have answered the queen's call if the purpose was not worthy. These were not made for the boy you were, they were made for the man you are becoming. With newfound resolve, Izuku stepped forward. He slid his left arm through the leather straps of the Aegis Minor. It was impossibly light, feeling less like a slab of metal and more like a perfectly balanced extension of his own arm. He then took the hilt of the Stygius, the leather molded to his grip as if it had been made for him, and no other. The faint hum of the shield and the soft light of the sword seemed to sync with his own heartbeat. Holding them felt right. It felt like coming home. The divine gifts did not magically grant him skill. In fact, his initial clumsiness was amplified. The shield, while light, was still an extra 2 feet of diameter he had to account for. He would turn too quickly and clip a weapon rack. He would misjudge its angle and a practice arrow would deflect into the ceiling instead of into the sand. The sword was even more difficult. He held it stiffly, an awkward poker extending from his fist, trying to apply Philippus's geometric angles to the fluid chaos of a spar. He was so focused on the technical aspects of its use, the wrist alignment, the footwork, the precise arc of a swing, that he was even slower and more predictable than before. Diana disarmed him for the 10th time that morning, the Stygius clattering harmlessly to the stone floor. Izuku slumped, his shoulders sagging in defeat. It's no use, he said, his voice laced with frustration. I have the mind of a general, the body of a grunt, and the coordination of a newborn fawn. These gifts are wasted on me. Diana picked up the Stygius, its light pulsing softly in her hand. You speak of your mind and body as if they are 2 different countries, Izuku. You have yet to learn that they are one. Your analysis is a great gift, but you are letting it imprison you. You cannot think your way to victory in a duel. You must feel it. She led him to the center of the palestra. Forget everything Philippus taught you for a moment. Forget the formations, the angles, the strategies. Forget the 10 principles of a defensive posture. Forget it all. She raised her own practice sword. I am going to attack you. Do not try to analyze me. Do not try to predict my moves. Do not think. Just react. Let the part of you that ran into a fight you couldn't win guide your hands. Let your heart move the shield. Let your spirit move the sword. Show me the boy who threw his backpack at a monster. Before he could protest, she lunged. She was a blur of motion, faster than he had ever seen her move before. There was no time for analysis, no time to check his footing or plan a counter. Her blade was a streak of silver aimed directly at his face. Panic, primal and electric, surged through him. And with it, instinct. He didn't think. I must raise my shield to block, he thought. Protect. The Aegis Minor came up, not with a clumsy, calculated heave, but with a sudden, fluid motion, as if it were a part of his own body. Diana's blade struck it with a sharp clang, and a jolt of energy shot up Izuku's arm. But it wasn't a painful shock. It was a surge of power, a thrum of contained force. The shield glowed faintly. Diana didn't relent. She flowed into another attack, a low sweep aimed at his legs. Again, there was no time to think. He just moved, hopping back, the edge of the shield dipping to cover his shins. She pressed her attack, a whirlwind of strikes from all angles. High, low, left, right. Izuku was no longer trying to fight her. He was just surviving. His mind, for once, was silent. His body moved on its own, guided by the raw, desperate need to not get hit. The Aegis Minor became a whirling circle of bronze, intercepting every strike. He wasn't thinking about angles or parries. He was simply putting the shield where the danger was, and then he felt it. With each blocked blow, a pulse of energy flowed into the shield. It was building, like pressure behind a dam. The shield began to hum audibly, a low, resonant note. Diana unleashed a powerful overhead strike, putting her weight behind it. Izuku met it with the shield. The impact was immense, but instead of staggering him, he felt the shield absorb the entirety of the blow. The hum rose in pitch, and the Gorgon's head seemed to blaze with light. Without thinking, driven by an instinct to relieve the pressure, he pushed back. The shield unleashed the stored energy in a concussive wave, a silent, invisible force that threw Diana back several feet, forcing her to brace herself to keep her footing. She looked at him, a slow, brilliant smile spreading across her face. "There," she breathed. "There you are, Izuku." Izuku stared at his shield, then at his hands, then at her. He had done it. He hadn't thought about it. He had just done it. A giddy, bubbling laugh escaped him. He had finally connected the dots. The gear wasn't a tool for his mind to command. It was a conduit for his will. His desire to protect fueled the shield. "Again," he said, his voice clear and confident, a grin spreading across his face. This time, the spar was different. It was a dance. Izuku was still on the defensive, but it was no longer a desperate scramble. It was a purposeful, flowing defense. He used the Aegis Minor not just to block, but to deflect, turning the angle of Diana's strikes, forcing her to adjust, breaking her rhythm. He used the Stygius not to attack, but to control space, its blue-glowing edge a threat that kept her from getting too close, forcing her into the range he wanted. His style was taking shape. It was not the aggressive, overwhelming assault of Artemis. It was the style of a protector, a guardian. Precise, efficient, and utterly defensive. He was a rock in the storm, an immovable object that turned the fury of the hurricane back on itself. The final test of this stage of his training came, as it always seemed to do, in the form of Artemis. She stood in the palestra, armed with her favorite weapon, a 10-foot doru, a heavy war spear tipped with a murderous leaf-shaped point of gleaming bronze. "The princess tells me you no longer fight like a thinking machine," she said, her voice laced with skepticism as she spun the spear in her hands. "She says you have found your warrior's heart. I am not so easily convinced." "Show me." Without another word she charged. If Diana's attack had been a river, Artemis's was a tidal wave. She was pure, relentless aggression. Her spear was a blur, jabbing, thrusting, sweeping in a terrifying display of power and speed, but Izuku was ready. He planted his feet, sinking his center of gravity low, just as Philippus had once criticized him for failing to do. He held his shield high, the Stygius held in a ready, defensive posture at his side. He let his mind go quiet, focusing on that single, burning core of will inside him. Protect. The first strike came, a powerful thrust aimed at his chest. He met it with the Aegis. Clang! The shield absorbed the blow, the Gorgon head flashing. He didn't give ground. Artemis grunted, surprised by his stability. She flowed into a series of rapid-fire jabs, testing his defenses, looking for an opening. Izuku's shield was a living thing, a bronze blur that intercepted every single strike. He wasn't just blocking. He was using the shield's curved face to redirect the spear's point, sending it sliding harmlessly away. Artemis roared in frustration and put her full power into a sweeping attack meant to knock his legs out from under him. Izuku didn't try to block it head-on. At the last second, he leaped, tucking his legs up, and the spear passed harmlessly beneath him. He landed and immediately used the flat of the Stygius to slap the spear's shaft, disrupting Artemis's grip and forcing her to reset. The battle was a masterclass in defense versus offense. Artemis, the unstoppable force, against Izuku, the immovable object. The shield hummed, glowing brighter and brighter as it absorbed the punishment of Artemis's relentless assault. Finally, seeing she couldn't break him with simple force, Artemis changed tactics. She feinted a high thrust, and when Izuku moved to block, she spun, dropping low and sweeping the butt of her spear at his ankles. It was a brilliant move. Too fast to block, too low to jump. Analysis would have failed him. But instinct did not. As the spear butt came around, Izuku did something unexpected. He dropped his shield and slammed it edge first into the stone floor. Using the now braced shield as a pivot, he vaulted into the air, his body spinning over Artemis's attack. He landed behind her, his back to hers. Artemis, her attack having met only air, was momentarily overextended. In that split second of imbalance, Izuku acted. He didn't strike her. He hooked his foot behind hers, spun, and slammed the flat of the Aegis Minor into her back. It wasn't the blow that defeated her. It was the energy the shield had been storing. The entire kinetic force of her own furious assault, gathered and held within the divine bronze, was unleashed in a single, silent, concussive blast. Artemis was thrown forward as if struck by a battering ram. She flew 10 feet, her spear flying from her grasp, and landed skidding in the sand pit, winded and utterly shocked. The Palestra was silent, save for the sound of Izuku's own ragged breathing. He stood, his shield arm trembling from the recoil, the Gorgon's head now dark and quiet, its energy spent. Slowly, Artemis pushed herself to her feet, brushing sand from her armor. She looked at her spear, lying uselessly in the dirt. She looked at Izuku, standing ready, his stance perfect, his eyes clear and focused. He had not defeated her with strength. He had defeated her with her own strength. She walked over, picked up her spear, and rested it on her shoulder. She stood before him, her scarred face unreadable. She looked at the boy, no, the young warrior, in front of her. "Not bad, manling," she said, her voice a low, gravelly rasp. "Not bad at all." She turned and walked away, leaving Izuku standing alone in the center of the Palestra. He looked down at the Aegis Minor on his arm, then at the Stygius in his hand. He caught his own reflection in the polished bronze of the shield. He saw the determined set of his jaw, the hard-earned muscle in his arms, the quiet confidence in his green eyes. The face staring back at him was no longer the face of a fanboy who dreamed of being a hero. It was the face of a warrior who was learning how to become one. The clang of bronze on bronze echoed through the sun-drenched Palestra, a rhythmic, percussive song that had become the soundtrack to Izuku Midoriya's life. He moved with a grace he hadn't possessed a year ago, a fluid economy of motion that was a far cry from the stumbling, hesitant boy who had first set foot on this island. The Aegis Minor on his arm was no longer a foreign weight, but a part of him, a natural shield. The Stygius in his hand was not a weapon to be wielded, but an extension of his will, a line he drew in the sand that said, "You shall not pass." He was sparring with Diana, and for the first time, he was holding his own. Not through aggression, but through a masterful, unbreachable defense. Her practiced sword, a blur of silver, would lash out, and his shield would be there to meet it, not with a jarring crash, but with a gentle, turning motion that sent her blades sliding away. When she tried to close the distance, the blue glowing edge of the Stygius would flash in a precise arc, forcing her back, controlling the space between them without ever needing to make contact. He was a fortress, calm and unyielding, weathering the storm of her attack. Finally, Diana stepped back, lowering her sword. A thin sheen of sweat glistened on her brow, and a smile of genuine pride graced her lips. "Your form is perfect, Izuku," she said, her voice warm. "Artemis gave you the endurance of stone, and Philippus gave you the mind of a hawk. You have integrated their lessons flawlessly. You fight like a true Amazonian hoplite." Izuku beamed, his chest swelling with a pride that was still a new and heady sensation. He lowered his own weapons, his muscles humming with the pleasant ache of exertion. "Thank you, Diana-sensei. I've been studying the old scrolls from the Strategian, the ones about the shield-bearer Lycomedes." His philosophy of invincible defense is legendary. Diana finished, her smile becoming a little more thoughtful. But Lycomedes died defending a wall. A glorious death, but a death nonetheless. You have learned how to build a perfect wall, Izuku. You have mastered the body and the mind. But there is one final lesson, the most important one of all. It is the lesson that turns a soldier into a warrior, and a warrior into a peacekeeper. It is the lesson of the heart. She gestured for him to follow, leading him away from the familiar grounds of the Palestra and the Strategian. They walked through a part of the city he had seldom seen, a quieter, more contemplative district where graceful, willow-like trees drooped over silent reflecting pools. The air here was scented with jasmine and myrrh. They came to a small, secluded sanctuary, a circular temple open to the sky, its roof a ring of carved marble held up by slender, fluted columns. In the center of the temple was a simple stone font filled with crystal-clear water. For 3,000 years, Diana said, her voice hushed with reverence as they stepped into the sacred space. Amazons have been defined by more than our strength or our strategy. We are defined by our compassion. We fled man's world not because we were weak, but because we refused to partake in its endless cycle of cruelty and needless violence. The greatest weapon in our arsenal is not the sword or the spear. It is empathy. She approached the font and dipped her hands into the cool water. When she drew them out, she was holding a length of what looked like simple, golden rope. It was thinner and more delicate than her own legendary lasso of truth, and its gold was softer, warmer, like spun sunlight. It coiled in her hands with a soft, supple grace. This, she said, presenting it to Izuku, is the cestus of empathy. Izuku looked at the simple golden cord with awe. It didn't radiate the raw power of the Aegis or the Stygius. It felt quiet, humble. It is not a weapon of a champion like my own lasso, Diana explained. It does not compel truth. Its magic is far subtler, and in some ways far more difficult to wield. When it encircles a living being, it does not force them to speak. It allows the wielder to feel what they feel. Their raw, unfiltered emotions broadcast directly into your own heart. Izuku's eyes widened. You can feel their feelings? Precisely. You will feel their anger as a fire in your own chest. Their sorrow as a weight on your own shoulders. Their fear as a cold knot in your own stomach. It is a powerful tool for understanding, for de-escalation. But it is also dangerous. To feel the emotions of another so purely can be overwhelming. If you are not centered, you can be consumed by their rage, or drowned in their despair. It requires a strong heart, and an unwavering sense of self. Before you can hope to understand others, you must first truly understand yourself. That is your first trial. She handed the cestus to him. It was warm to the touch, and it seemed to thrum faintly with a gentle, living energy. Take it, and use it on yourself. Izuku stared at her, then at the golden cord. Use it on himself? He hesitated, his heart beginning to pound. The prospect was strangely terrifying. It felt more intimate and exposing than any physical trial Artemis had ever devised. Taking a deep breath, he sat cross-legged on the cool marble floor and, with a trembling hand, wrapped the cestus around his own forearm. The moment the loop was complete, the world fell away. The soft light of the temple, the scent of jasmine, the gentle presence of Diana, it all vanished, replaced by an internal maelstrom. The cestus glowed with a warm, honey-colored light, and it was as if a dam inside him had burst. He was flooded, not with thoughts, but with pure, unfiltered emotion, a chaotic symphony of everything he was. First came the surface feelings, strong and clear. The bedrock of his new self, a deep, resonant pride in his own strength, a fierce gratitude towards his teachers, and a burning, unwavering determination to be a hero, a protector. This was the Izuku forged on Themyscira. But then, the cestus dug deeper, pulling forth feelings he had long suppressed, ghosts from his past that still haunted the deep corners of his soul. He felt a sudden, crushing wave of inadequacy, cold and sharp, the phantom pain of 1,000 taunts of Deku. It was the voice of Kaken, of his teachers, of his own reflection for 15 long years. He felt a spike of bone-deep terror, the memory of the sludge villain's foul liquid filling his lungs, the suffocating helplessness, and beneath it all, a vast, quiet ocean of loneliness. The feeling of being the odd one out, the quirkless fanboy watching from the sidelines, the only male on an island of warrior women. It was a profound ache, a feeling of being fundamentally, irrevocably different. Tears welled in his eyes as the weight of it all washed over him, raw and undeniable. He was a fraud, a weak, scared, lonely little boy playing dress-up with the gods' weapons. He felt his hard-won confidence beginning to crumble. "Breathe, Izuku!" Diana's voice cut through the storm, a calm anchor in the raging sea of his feelings. She knelt before him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. "Do not fight the feelings, do not judge them. Just acknowledge them. They are a part of you. They are the riverbed that your new strength flows over. The loneliness you feel is the root of your desire for connection. The fear you feel is the source of your courage. The inadequacy you feel is the fuel for your unbreakable will to improve." He focused on her voice, on the steady pressure of her hand. He took a ragged breath. She was right. He wasn't supposed to fight these feelings. He was supposed to understand them. He let himself feel the loneliness, not as a wound, but as a space inside him that he could fill with his bonds with Diana, Philippus, and even the grudging respect of Artemis. He let himself feel the fear, not as a chain, but as a reminder of what was at stake, of why he had to be strong. He let himself feel the echoes of Deku, not as an insult, but as a starting point, a measure of how far he had come. Slowly, the maelstrom subsided. The conflicting emotions didn't disappear, but they settled, finding their proper place within him. He was no longer drowning in them. He was observing them, understanding how they all fit together to create the person he was. He was a mosaic of old pains and new strengths, and for the first time, he saw the whole picture clearly. He opened his tear-filled eyes and looked at Diana, a watery but genuine smile on his face. "I understand," he whispered, his voice hoarse. She smiled back, her eyes full of warmth. "You have faced yourself without flinching. That is the first, and most difficult step. Now you are ready to face another." His next trial took place far from the pristine marble of the city. Diana led him high into the rugged, windswept crags of the northern mountains, a place where the pristine beauty of Themyscira gave way to a wild, untamed wilderness. This was the hunting ground of creatures from myth. "Your own emotions are complex, tangled by memory and thought," Diana explained as they navigated a narrow, treacherous path. "An animal's emotions are purer, more direct. They are an excellent primer for learning to distinguish a simple signal from the noise." She brought him to a ravine where a rock slide had recently occurred. Trapped in a small cave-in, its hind leg pinned beneath a heavy boulder, was a creature Izuku's mind could barely comprehend. It was a manticore cub, no bigger than a large dog. It had the tawny body of a lion, the leathery wings of a bat, and a tail tipped with a cluster of venomous-looking spines. Its face was unnervingly human-like, twisted into a snarl of pain and terror. It hissed at their approach, its tail lashing furiously, sending sharp quills thudding into the rocks around them. "It is young, terrified, and in great pain," Diana said, her voice calm. "Its aggression is not born of malice, but of fear. A warrior of man's world might see a monster to be slain, an Amazon sees a creature to be soothed. Use the cestus." Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. The cub was radiating an aura of pure, feral hostility. But nodding to Diana, he uncoiled the golden cord. He took a steadying breath, centering himself as she had taught him, remembering the quiet balance he had found in the temple. He swung the cestus in a smooth, practiced arc. The golden loop sailed through the air and settled perfectly around the cub's neck. The effect was instantaneous and violent. He was slammed with a wave of emotion so powerful it made him stagger. It was a chaotic explosion of three distinct feelings, all screaming at once. First, a blinding, searing pain that shot up his own phantom leg, making him gasp and nearly fall. Second, a claustrophobic, suffocating terror, the feeling of being trapped, cornered, and helpless. And third, riding atop it all, a hot, defensive rage, a primal instinct to lash out at anything that came near, to drive away the source of the threat. His first instinct was to recoil, to pull the cestus away, to escape the overwhelming flood of the creature's agony and fear. "Look past it, Izuku!" Diana's voice called out, sharp and clear. The anger is a shield. The fear is the wound. What is the root? What is the core emotion driving all the others? Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, forcing himself to endure the psychic assault. He pushed past the snarling anger, past the shivering terror, and focused on the first, purest sensation, the pain, the sharp, unyielding agony from its trapped leg. That was the source. Everything else, the fear, the rage, the lashing tail, was a reaction to that single, overriding reality. It's just hurt, he realized. It's not trying to kill me. It's trying to protect itself from more pain. His entire approach shifted. He stopped seeing a monster. He saw a patient. He held the cestus loosely, not as a restraint, but as a line of communication. He pushed his own feelings down the cord, not complex thoughts, but pure, simple intent. Calm. Safety. Help. He projected the feeling of Diana's gentle hands tending his own wounds, the soothing coolness of the healing salves. He began to speak, his voice low and soft. It's okay, he murmured, his Greek still accented but now gentle and flowing. Sure, it's okay. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm here to help. Just let me help. The manticore cub stilled. Its hissing softened to a low whine. The emotional torrent flooding Izuku's mind lessened, the rage receding like a dying fire, leaving only the fear and the pain. He took a cautious step forward. The cub flinched but didn't lash out. He took another. Working slowly, carefully, he and Diana managed to use a sturdy branch as a lever to roll the heavy boulder off the cub's leg. The limb was badly twisted, clearly broken. Izuku, using knowledge gleaned from the Amazonian healers and his own frantic first-aid scribbles from his old notebooks, quickly fashioned a splint from scavenged branches and strips of cloth from his own tunic. As he gently bound the cub's leg, the fear it was projecting through the cestus finally began to fade, replaced by a confused, tentative sense of relief. When he was finished, he loosened the golden loop and let it fall away. The manticore cub looked at him with its strangely intelligent eyes, let out a soft whimper, and nudged his hand with its head before limping away to hide in the shadows of the ravine. Izuku stood up, his body trembling slightly from the emotional feedback, but his heart was light. He hadn't defeated a monster. He had saved a life. He had used the cestus not to control, but to understand. And through understanding he had brought peace. The final trial of the heart was the most complex. An animal's emotions were pure, but a person's were a tangled, contradictory mess. Diana brought him to the archery range, where a group of younger Amazons were practicing under the watchful eye of a stern instructor. Among them was a young woman named Lyra. She was fierce and dedicated, but her form was plagued by a tiny, almost imperceptible flaw, a tendency to cant her bow ever so slightly at the moment of release. Her arrows consistently flew wide of the target, thudding into the packed earth wall a few inches to the left of the bullseye. With each missed shot, the line of her shoulders grew tighter, her jaw more clenched. Diana began to instruct Izuku in the basics of archery. He was, predictably, clumsy at first. But his analytical mind and his now perfected physical discipline allowed him to grasp the fundamentals quickly. Within the hour, he was consistently landing his arrows in the outer rings of the target. Lyra watched him, her dark eyes growing stormy. On her next shot she drew her bowstring with so much force her hand trembled, and her arrow flew wildly, missing the target entirely. She let out a choked cry of frustration and slammed her bow down on the rack. "It's easy for you," she snapped, her voice sharp and loud enough to make the other archers turn. Her glare was fixed squarely on Izuku. "The goddess is chosen. The queen's pet project. You have Diana herself as your private tutor. Of course you learn quickly. Some of us have to struggle for every scrap of progress." The other Amazons looked on awkwardly. Izuku was taken aback, flushing under the heat of her anger. "I am sorry," he stammered out of old habit. "I didn't mean, just leave me alone," Lyra snarled, turning her back on him, her shoulders shaking with suppressed emotion. Diana walked over to Izuku and spoke softly, so only he could hear. "Her anger is a bow drawn too tight. The arrow must fly somewhere. Right now, it is aimed at you. Use the cestus. Find the true target." Izuku hesitated. Using the cestus on an unwilling Amazon felt like a profound violation of privacy. But he trusted Diana. He took a deep breath, centered himself, and subtly cast the golden loop. It snaked through the air and settled over Lyra's shoulders as she faced away from him. He braced himself for the hot, sharp sting of her anger. And it came, a flash of fiery resentment directed at him, the outsider, the male who was receiving so much attention. But it was a shallow heat. Beneath it lay a confusing, turbulent sea of other feelings. He felt a bitter, acidic tang of jealousy, not just of him, but of Diana, of the other, more successful archers. It was the jealousy of someone who felt they were being left behind. Beneath that, a cold, heavy knot of insecurity, a deep-seated fear that she wasn't good enough, that she would never live up to the legacy of the warriors around her, and at the very core of it all, a crushing, overwhelming sense of her own failure and frustration. The anger she was projecting at him was nothing more than the smoke from a fire of self-loathing. She wasn't angry at him for succeeding, she was angry at herself for failing. The insight was so clear, so painful, that Izuku felt a pang of sympathy that completely extinguished his own defensiveness. He immediately pulled the cestus back, the golden cord coiling in his hand. He understood. To confront her with his knowledge, to say, "I know you're just insecure," would be a cruel and devastating blow. The cestus was not a tool for winning arguments. It was a tool for healing wounds. He walked over to where Lyra stood, her back still to him. She stiffened, expecting another apology or a confrontation. "You hold your breath when you release," Izuku said softly, his voice gentle. "I was doing that too. Philippus told me it ruins your focus." Lyra turned slightly, her angry expression faltering, replaced by confusion. "What? And your elbow?" Izuku continued, pointing to his own. "You lock it just a little. I think Diana-sensei said that puts tension in the string." He offered her a small, self-deprecating smile. "I failed the mountain run 30 times before I made it to the first shrine. I think I'm an expert at struggling." He wasn't lecturing her. He wasn't pitying her. He was standing beside her, validating her struggle by sharing his own. He was treating her not as an adversary, but as a comrade. Lyra stared at him. The fiery anger in her eyes flickered and died, replaced by a grudging, surprised respect. The tension in her shoulders eased. She looked down at her bow, then back at him. "Thank you," she mumbled, her cheeks coloring slightly. She picked up her bow, took a deep breath, and drew an arrow, her movements more deliberate, less frantic. The arrow flew. It struck the target with a solid thwump, just on the edge of the innermost circle. A small, shaky smile touched her lips. Izuku smiled back and returned to his own lane, his heart feeling lighter than it had in a long time. He had faced anger not with a shield, but with kindness. He had won a victory without a fight. That evening, as the sun bled fiery oranges and purples across the horizon, Izuku sat with Diana on the balcony of his small chamber. The sea below was calm, the air was warm, and a profound sense of peace had settled over the island. He held the cestus of empathy in his lap, its golden fibers glowing softly in the twilight. "For 15 years, Izuku said, his voice quiet and reflective as he stared out at the endless expanse of water. "I saw the world in black and white. There were heroes, and there were villains. Heroes were strong, and they used their strength to beat the villains. That was the goal. To win. To be the strongest, so you could beat anyone who stood against you." He looked down at the cestus. "But that's not strength, is it? It's just power. All might is the strongest. He punches villains, and they fall. But then they go to prison, and new villains just appear. The fight never ends. It's like trying to fight the ocean. You can punch the waves, but the tide always comes back in." He finally turned to look at Diana, his green eyes shining with the light of a powerful, world-altering epiphany. He was connecting everything he had learned, Artemis's endurance, Philippus's strategy, his own defensive skills, and now, the lessons of the cestus. "When I used the cestus on Lyra," he said, his voice filled with a quiet intensity, "I felt her anger. But underneath it, I felt her pain. The manticore cub, it wasn't a monster, it was just a scared, hurt animal. Its rage was a shield for its fear." He took a deep breath, the words he was about to say feeling like the most important he had ever spoken. I don't think I want to beat villains anymore, Diana-sensei. Diana listened, her expression serene, her eyes reflecting the dying light of the sun. She knew this was the moment his entire education had been building towards. I want to save them. Izuku finished, his voice gaining a strength and clarity that resonated with profound conviction. A villain isn't just a bad person. They are a person who is hurting, or lost, or so consumed by their own rage and fear that they can't see any other way. They're like Lyra, but their frustration is so much bigger. They're like the Manticore, but their pain has turned them into a real monster. To just punch them, to just win, that's like putting a bandage on a festering wound. You're not solving the problem, you're just hiding it. You're not healing the person. You're just breaking their body. He looked from the cestus in his hands to the aegis, and Stygius resting against the wall. You gave me a shield that can absorb any blow. A sword that can subdue without killing, and a lasso that can find the heart of a person's pain. These aren't the tools of a conqueror. They're the tools of a healer. A guardian. A single tear traced a path down his cheek, but it was not a tear of sadness. It was a tear of pure, crystalline purpose. That's the hero I want to be. Not the one who wins the fight. The one who ends the fight. The one who looks at a villain and doesn't just see a monster to be defeated, but a person to be saved.